Hello and welcome to Wild Earth Ways. I'm Kat, and today's video is my September reflections. So I'll be talking about my tarot practice through the month of September, the books I've read, and how I've been using my journal in this time. I always enjoy watching these kind of videos from other creators because you get a little view into their practice, how they actually use tarot, and maybe pick up some ideas for books and decks. So I hope that you will also enjoy this video and get a little glimpse into what my tarot practice has been like this month. September was a relatively quiet month for me this year, not too much going on with work and other things. So I was able to actually really dive into my tarot practice and spend some time with two decks in particular. So I'm going to start there and take a look at the first deck, which I was using through September. And that was the John Bower Tarot. So I have mostly used this deck for kind of storytelling, creative writing prompts, and just kind of playing around with and exploring the deck itself. I made a full video about this, and so I'll link that video down below if you're interested in diving into this deck, and I'll just talk about it very briefly here. So here's the deck. And I'm sure it's very familiar to lots of you. It's very much a storytelling deck, very autumnal or winter in mood, I think. And I used it kind of to explore different techniques for telling stories with tarot. I did also do a few 3-card readings for myself as well. And the main thing I did with this deck this month was combine it with this book. So I was reading this book, An Illustrated Treasury of Swedish Folk and Fairy Tales, with the illustrations of John Bower. And through the book, I was able to learn about the different stories and how they connect with the deck. And this is what I talked about in my previous video. So if you're interested, check it out and you'll get all the information there about the stories and about how I was using different storytelling techniques with this deck. Now, the other deck I was using this month was an old favorite. This is the Witch's Wisdom. So the Witch's Wisdom tarot deck was created by Phyllis Carrot, and the artwork is by Danielle Barlow. It's a very beautiful watercolor deck with the artwork mostly focusing upon nature. And in the minors, you can see that there isn't a lot of people in the deck. It's mostly natural scenery in the minors. And then in the court cards and in the major arcanas, there are more people. Now, this deck has been a very important one for me. I think I got this deck in 2021, and I straight away had a very close connection with it. I immediately connected with this deck very strongly. And I used this deck for daily single card draws for a long time. For over a year, I was using this deck very, very regularly, and I became very familiar with the imagery in the deck. And the reason I was using it so much is because I really find this deck speaks to my values and my beliefs about nature and the natural world. I understand that this can be a challenging deck because it makes a lot of changes to the RWS system, whilst at the same time still staying connected to that system. So you can immediately see the suits are the elements, and also that there are some changes in the meanings of the cards. Nevertheless, I think you can see that many of the cards connect clearly enough with the RWS. So here we have 4 of Fire, 4 of Wands, and the image we have is one of a home, of a family that's standing strong together. We can see the Fox family and in the distance this cottage. So it connects with that image of the 4 of Wands, with the celebration of a wedding perhaps, with the village in the background. So we can see that they do communicate with each other, the RWS and the Witch's Wisdom. On the other hand, what throws some people is that the major arcana are reversed. And so we have here the card 13, Shaman. That is not the death card in this deck. This is the Hermit card. And so 13 is the equivalent of 9 in the RWS. And we just saw earlier here This 9 is actually the death card, and it's rebirth. This is typical of how the deck, of the approach of the deck, in that it deliberately chooses to focus upon positive messages. There are harder messages in the deck, but on the whole, it is with a focus upon the positive, which they discuss in the guidebook explicitly about why they chose to do that. So to be honest, it just didn't really bother me that much that the major arcana were reversed when I was first using this deck, because I just, I wasn't reading the deck like as a book, but rather drawing cards. And so the order isn't particularly important to me, and especially because I'm not someone who reads numerologically. So the Sun card here, for example, I could simply read it as the Sun card. The fact that it's labelled 3, which we would normally connect with the Empress, didn't bother me that much. And then there was a long period in which I wasn't using this deck. In fact, I wasn't using almost any decks with one exception. And so I became more disconnected again from this deck. And what I wanted to do this month was basically renew my connection. And for a couple of reasons. One, because I had really enjoyed using it in the past, and so I wanted to try using it again. And secondly, because I felt that my disconnection from the deck was a symptom of something larger, which was a kind of disconnection from nature. So the question I was asking myself was, can this deck help me to reconnect with nature? Can a deck in general help somebody connect with nature? So for me, this is, maybe I need to make a separate video about this to go into it in more depth, but it's a significant question for me because nature has always been very, very important for me. But then in the past couple of years, for lots of practical reasons really, I just haven't been able to spend as much time outside, and as a result, I've been feeling a little bit more disconnected from nature. I don't actually believe we are ever disconnected from nature. I simply believe that as humans, as part of this earth, we are all already connected with nature. It's just who and what we are. There's no outside of nature. But nevertheless, the kind of the greater natural world, the more than human natural world, has been a little bit harder for me to access, just for some practical reasons to do with day-to-day life and health, that I haven't been able to spend as much time outside. And so I kind of picked up this deck as a way to remind myself of what nature means to me. And what I did was I put the deck into order and I worked through it card by card. So I'll show you how that looks in my journal. So I was working in my Hobonichi Cousin, which is where I keep my study notes, writing notes, poems, and so on. So I did a kind of card by card deck study in this journal. So this is where it began. It's not actually the date I began it on because I had a section of blank pages which I went and backfilled for this particular deck study. And because during June and July I was not so available, or I wasn't working in this book so much. And what I did was for each card I wrote the traditional name, and then I wrote a gift. So for each card, what is the gift of that card? So Ace of Wands, gift of vitality. I wrote a few notes on my associations with the card, and then I wrote from the Witch's Wisdom. So the purple text are where I've quoted from the Witch's Wisdom guidebook, and I also made other notes as well about how the card is treated in the Witch's Wisdom, because I wanted to do a deck study which was both standard tarot meanings and Witch's Wisdom alongside one another. I also have, for most of the cards, a poem. So the poems I wrote, they're actually old poems which I wrote. So I wrote them in about 2022, early 2023, when I was writing a novel in poetry about shapeshifters, and for each card I had a short poem, and then I would have a narrative section as well. And so the short poems for the cards I pulled out and put into the study, because when I was writing those poems, I was very much connected with the witch's wisdom, and I had the witch's wisdom in mind when I was writing those poems. So I simply went through and worked with the cards in turn. At first I was doing it quite slowly, not many cards, maybe one card a day or two or three, and not every day. And then I kind of moved a little bit quicker because I found myself remembering it more and more clearly. And so I was able to move through the cards a little bit more swiftly. And another thing that I brought to this deck study was that I read the guidebook for each card alongside a more standard tarot book. So I'll show you. I was at the same time looking at this book. You will be able to read tarot by the end of this book by Nicole Rallis and Peter Henry Reed. So this book is by the artist Nicole Rallis, who created the Ophidia Rosa, the Ad Orbiter, and the Viola Lux Umbra Tarots. I did a video on the Viola Lux Umbra Tarot a little while back, and I spoke about like what that deck means to me and how I use it. And so when I did see that she had published this book, I also decided to pick it up and explore it, even though I don't really need another kind of learn to read tarot book. I already feel pretty confident reading tarot, but I was curious to see what her interpretations, what their interpretations rather, would be. And I'm glad I did. I'll show you inside the book. The book is very nicely produced and not particularly expensive. So I think it's quite good value if you are someone who's just learning to understand the meanings of the tarot. And anyway, it was a pleasant read. So the book starts with a brief introduction to tarot, and then it moves into card-by-card readings. And each of the cards is accompanied by an illustration by Nicole Rallis. So this is the Minor Arcana section. You can see that we have an image and a short text for each of the cards, as well as some keywords. It's quite nice because they talk about how the flower has been chosen in the images, and so you get just a different kind of viewpoint on the meanings of the tarot cards through the perspective of the different associations of different flowers. So I read this alongside my Witch's Wisdom study just to kind of compare the more standard tarot meanings of the cards with what they had done in their deck. And sometimes it's very close, and sometimes it's really not close at all. So we can see, for example, here, 5 of air, 5 of swords. This is an image with the sense of sacrifice, the idea that the owls have to shelter their babies from the rain and get wet themselves, their feathers being less waterproof than other birds because of the emphasis that they have put on silence in the feathers. And so the card asks you to think about the sacrifices you are making in your life and what they're for, the purposes of the choices that you're making. Here, for example, we see the 10 of Earth, so 10 of Pentacles. I think it fits very clearly with the Rider-Waite-Smith idea of a community. So here we can see the mushrooms in the forest, or toadstools, I'm not quite sure, and the mycelium, the root network of the fungi, and how they connect up to the trees. And of course we understand that these kind of mycelial networks in the soil are bringing nutrients to the trees and also to the fungus, and that they form a kind of web of life through the forest by which nutrients get passed around, and even information is passed around as well. And this, I think, connects quite beautifully with the community image and the generation image in the 10 of Pentacles. Similarly, we have here the 8 of Water, so 8 of Cups, and it's a beautiful image of these little baby turtles going into the sea under the full moon. And that makes, I think, perfect sense when you connect that up to the Rider-Waite-Smith image of going on a journey with a sense of purpose under the guidance of the moon. So maybe by contrast, this is the 9 of fire, so 9 of wands. And here we can see a kind of abundance of harvest fruits, the moment of turning in the year and bringing forth fruit from the earth. Now, does that connect with the 9 of wands as we see it in the RWS? Perhaps, in the sense of kind of reaching the end of a journey, the fullness, the turning over of that exhausted figure who's standing by the palisade. But I would say that this is a more positive image for me than the Rider-Waite-Smith image. I did find that the elements have a very nice clear vision which is communicated through the deck. Essentially the deck is one that celebrates the sacred in all life and how that flows through everything, through us, through our work, through the earth and everyone who lives upon the earth. It's a deck that repeatedly comes back to the message of interconnection of all life on the earth, the sacredness of all life on earth, and the importance of reciprocity. So recognizing what we get from the earth and how we give back to the earth, and keeping everything in balance, which I think is a really special message to get from a tarot deck. It's all about being essentially in harmony with nature. So I think the deck is a nice one to pick up for a kind of a reminding of those sort of key values that many of us, I think, in the tarot community share, a kind of value for nature and our place within the natural world. Also, it's quite a reassuring deck. So, for example, you can see here 7 of fire, so that being the 7 of wands, and kind of similarly to the 9 of wands, the meaning is shifted here. You can see it's almost like a strength card, right? That the images of beauty and courage and resilience, which makes sense when you compare it to the 7 of wands, except that you don't have the same sense of threat that you do in that card. And overall, I would say that the way they represent nature at least in the words in the guidebook, is very much focused upon the positive, that like love is moving through all of the natural world and that it's benevolent and we can trust it. So a criticism which I do have of the deck is that there can be a kind of repetition in the ideas and maybe a lack of range. So for example, here we have 10 of air, that's 10 of swords. Clearly a less negative image than our Rider-Waite-Smith and in fitting with the message of the deck. I'm sorry for the background noise if you can hear the noise of the saw out in the street. I hope it's not too annoying. This is my chance to record while my kids are at school, so I'm going to try and persist. Hopefully they'll finish up soon. So the 10 of air here, the 10 of swords, is a murmuration of starlings, and it's a indicator to look for the uplifting beauty of nature, and it's different kinds of murmurations that we find around us, whether it's like the wind blowing through the leaves of a tree, or the fish swimming in the sea, or if we're lucky enough to see a murmuration of starlings, to see nature coming together to create this kind of communicative beauty that we can recognize. And this is part of the message that they find in the air suit, is of like divine love essentially moving through all of the earth. And I do really appreciate that. I do think that it does go quite far from traditional tarot, in the sense that, like I said before, that there is perhaps a kind of lack of range in the meanings in the cards. For example, something I notice very often is how much the messages will tell you to like pay attention and trust and listen to nature to find your purpose. They come back very, very often to this idea of purpose. What is your purpose? How are you serving the earth? Those kind of questions, which I do find to be very valuable. Like, these are questions I ask myself all the time, and I used to ask myself even more. But the repetition over the course of the deck study did start to kind of get at me a little bit, in the sense that perhaps I don't always want to be thinking about purpose. I want to be thinking about what I'm actually doing now. what I'm already doing and how life is sort of already happening in a sense, rather than looking ahead to something which I perhaps have to do in the future. Also, this kind of risk when you use language like that you feel like you're not doing enough ever, that you need to find a purpose, you need to find something to work for in order to be of service to the earth. This, I think, is a very common way of thinking among environmentalists. Myself, I used to be quite an active environmentalist, and it can get a little bit distracting away from what you're already doing. However, I don't think that is necessarily, how you have to use the deck. Like, take a look at this beautiful, beautiful pilgrim card. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck. I have this as an art print. I think it's lovely. So this, of course, is the Fool card. And we can see her completely alive to the natural beauty of the world in the present moment. And this is the final card of the deck. So the choice to reverse the major arcana, it's quite straightforward, really. The idea is that rather than trying to take the soul on a journey moving out of the earth, away from the earth, rather this deck is taking the soul on a journey into the heart of the earth, and not trying to kind of have some kind of enlightenment vision that takes you away from nature, but rather deeper and deeper into nature. So the authors make the point in the introduction that the deck that you used will reflect a certain value system, and that they are making deliberate choices in their deck to present a value system that centralizes nature. So instead of having enlightenment mean leaving the earth behind, which they say is the value at the heart of the rider deck, I think that's open for debate whether or not we use it that way, or have to use it that way. After all, the final card is the World card, so it depends perhaps on how you read the cards. But the value system of this deck is very, very clear, and it's beautifully expressed. For example, they talk about the self-awareness of nature and awareness of ourselves as part of a greater independent divine whole. This is really the kind of the core value of the deck. And I thought that this explanation here of how they dealt with the sword suit, the air suit, was particularly interesting. So Phyllis Carrot writes this: air revealed the purpose of consciousness, awareness of the unifying presence and power of divine love. Fire wanted us to understand that because it's the spark of life, its greatest power is joy. Water showed us that it's a messenger, carrying everything put into it throughout creation. It also revealed how embodied our emotions are and should be. Earth revealed that, in addition to its countless blessings of manifestation that nourish body and soul, it's the element of healing. Returning to air, they say, it showed us the magic of changing consciousness at will from negative to positive, revealing right ways of thinking rather than depicting the wrong ways, and the context was always love. So you can see that it's a guidebook that doesn't shy away from using this kind of language of spirituality and love. They talk about how creating the deck, we could hear the earth's voice and see the earth's blessings. And in this sense, yes, it did help me with my goal of connecting with nature, in the simple sense of kind of being a reminder that I'm already connected with nature, just to feel the confidence of that I don't have to be able to go on like long treks in order to have that connection. It's already there in every breath, every time you drink some water, the relationships with those around me. So as I was working through the deck card by card, it was really nice to reconnect with the different ideas in the deck. On the other hand, I didn't get to use it very much as a tarot deck. So at the end of the deck study, I did do a first reading with the deck, which I enjoyed. But now I've completed the card by card deck study, I think I would like to use this deck again more for actual readings and trying to use it in kind of personal daily readings. Or not daily readings, I don't read every day, but like weekly. I don't know if you can hear it, but it does sound like my cat needs a bit of help, so I'm going to go and reassure her and be back in a moment. Okay, so that was the Witch's Wisdom. That was the other main deck that I used this month. And I think I really mostly just did use the Power and the Witch's Wisdom. I'm trying to remember if I used any other decks this month. I may have picked some up at some point, but mostly those are the two decks which I was paying attention to this month. So I'm going to move on to books read, and for this I have brought out my journal again because I do record my reading in this book. And this is the month of September. Not a huge amount of reading, I can see at a glance, but a few really good ones. So at the start of the month, I finished off reading Shirley. Shirley is a novel by Charlotte Bronte, and I love Jane Eyre and have read it multiple times. I also do like Villette as well, but I had never read this one, and I thought that was actually pretty strange. I came across it in a bookshop, and I thought, wow, why have I never read this book by Charlotte Bronte when I do really love Jane Eyre in particular? But I feel like I must have at some point read that this was not as good. So let me know in the comments, have you read Shirley? If you've read other books by Charlotte Bronte, if you've read Jane Eyre, have you also read this one? Because I get the feeling that it's much less read. And the fact is, it is a pretty strange book, to be honest. It's set during the Napoleonic Wars, during the time of the Luddites. So one of the characters in the book owns a mill, and they're in the process of changing from more laborers to more machine-based work, and there's a lot of kind of protests happening around this mechanization of the industry. And there are two main characters, Shirley, obviously, and Caroline. They're two young women. Shirley is quite wealthy and Caroline is quite poor, but they are good friends, and it's about their falling in love and what stands between them and the marriages that they ideally want to make. And it's in places beautifully written, like very emotional. People are always in this novel getting sick, like really sick due to emotional distress, and then recovering. And so a lot of the novel is about kind of sickness and recovery, and quite internalized monologues inside people's minds. Very intense writing as well. There's some kind of political writing about the place of women, for example. It's a little bit all over the place, especially by comparison to Jane Eyre or Villette, but at the same time, very intense. So this is where I did my review of the novel, and I always give a kind of a numbers breakdown for each book I read, and so for each kind of novel like this, rather, I should say. And so I gave it an 8s for character, atmosphere and writing, 7s for plot, intrigue and logic, and 8 for enjoyment, so a 7.6. It's kind of an average score. I did enjoy the book. I'm not sure if I would reread it, but perhaps. Certainly if you are a fan of Jane Eyre and you want a little bit more from the author, you could try it out. But I would say that the male characters in this book are not as charismatic, perhaps, as Rochester, for example, in Jane Eyre. So that was kind of a little bit of a weakness, in the sense that I wasn't convinced by the romantic relationships, in the sense that I personally wasn't convinced that the men deserved the women in this book. But it was a really interesting read. So after reading Shirley, I read the Swedish Folk and Fairy Tales, a very quick read, very enjoyable. As I said in the video I did on that deck, I found the writing style super easy to read and very pleasant. But just bear in mind that these are folk and fairy tales for adults. You might need to censor them if you want to share them with children. After that, I started reading Idylls of the King. So this is by Tennyson, and these are poetic retellings of the Arthurian stories. So actually, more specifically, they're retellings of Malory. So Malory in the 15th century published these prose tellings of the stories of King Arthur and his knights. This is something I studied when I was studying medieval literature and when I was working on my doctorate. along with other kind of Arthurian romances. And then Tennyson retold them in poetry in blank verse. So it's non-rhymed, but it is iambic pentameter, kind of similar to Paradise Lost, for example. Except that Tennyson's writing is, I would say, kind of lighter and more lyrical in style. So I read a couple of them already, and then I decided just to take a break, because since they are a series of stories, you don't have to read them all at once. And I'm quite enjoying it. I'm going to wait until I've finished to give a full review of this. So after deciding to take a break from Idylls of the King, I started reading Titus Groan. So Titus Groan by Mervyn Peake. I've read this book before. All of the 3 Gormenghast books I have read. I think I read them 25 years ago, something like that, when I was an undergraduate, so a long time ago. And I've been lugging around my copies of the books ever since because I'm very attached to them, and I really was very, very struck by them when I read them all that time ago. And I finally got around to rereading this one. Wow, what a read. Amazing. I found it absolutely fascinating. So a couple of things to say about Titus Groan and the Gormenghast trilogy. This is the first in the trilogy. Mervyn Peake published this in 1946. I think he was very strongly affected by his experiences in the war as a war artist. And although this is a fantasy novel, it's not set in the real world as we would recognize it at all. It is probably very impacted by his personal trauma. Now, Gormenghast is a castle where for like 900 years they have been practicing the same rituals, the same way of life, and it's a kind of land in decay. You actually have no sense of an outside from Gormenghast, although there is a kind of natural surrounding around it. Nobody comes, nobody goes. You're just stuck in this massive, crumbling, Gothic castle. It's fantasy, but there's no magic. There's no magic at all. It's just fantasy in the sense that it's not the real world, basically. So for centuries, the Earl of Groan has been living in the kind of same ritualized way, everybody fulfilling the kind of the roles that their parents had fulfilled. And the characters of the novel are kind of grotesque. Everything is extreme. So like you have this, the Earl of Gormenghast, Lord Sepulchrave, he's kind of very melancholic, solemn character, just lost in his books. And his wife, the Countess of Groan, she's a sort of huge monumental woman who is always surrounded by birds. She can call birds to her, and also her white cats who sort of who are always kind of moving around her like a sea. And then there's the different servants. The character that you can see drawn here in Mervyn Peake's drawing, he was also an artist, is Fuchsia, their daughter. And into this world there is an element of change, anarchy thrown through the character of Steerpike, who is a 17-year-old boy who is very ambitious and clever and ready to use anybody in any way in order to to basically get power, essentially. This is what he's after. Now, the writing in the book is very baroque. It's very dense. Sometimes it's extraordinary. Like, I really felt like I was inside this world. Sometimes it gets a bit much. I think you have to be willing to kind of just spend time and accept the kind of long, over-the-top sentences. Why use one word when you could use 10? This seems to be the way of the book, and even quite words which I didn't even know. It's quite densely written. Very strange novel. And I can't even compare it with really anything else. There are kind of writers like China Miéville, who, I'm not sure how to say his name, China Miéville, who will say that Mervyn Peake was an important influence on them. But I would say that I have read a couple of his books, and I would say they are a lot more accessible than this. But it's an amazing book. Okay, so this is my review for Titus Grown, and it got a 9.3. And that's because for character, atmosphere, and writing, I just had to give 10s. For plot, intrigue, and logic, 9s. For enjoyment, just an 8. So, I mean, I could have enjoyed it more. Sometimes the darkness of it just kind of is heavy. It sort of got into my dreams. It was there in my mind when I woke up as well. And you start to kind of almost feel like one of these grotesque characters, which is not a nice feeling. So the enjoyment is a little less, although I'm just full of admiration for this book. And that was it for reading and decks this month. I've also been enjoying using this journal to record poems which I come across that I like, to make notes on my writing, like I showed you before the deck study. And I also have been continuing with the project which I spoke about in an earlier video, which I'll show you if I flip back. So this is from my earlier project in which I wrote a fantasy novel with a short piece of prose for each of the tarot cards and a short poem. And I kind of wrote the final draft essentially in here. And I have been publishing it week by week on Substack, which is free. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. Each week I publish 4 or 5 sections of the story, and it's complete, so I'm hoping I'll be able just to kind of continue through with the whole of the story. I have some thoughts about it in retrospect, about things I kind of wish I'd done differently and would prefer to do differently in the future. I have some other projects which I'm working on next coming up, involving storytelling and tarot. I'm going to not talk about them this time because I want to go deeper in, and I'm really excited to share those projects with you. Probably at the end of October, maybe into November when I've made more progress with them. But yeah, it's something I'm really enjoying working on, involving tarot and storytelling in this journal. I'm going to be going away for a couple of weeks now. I'm going to go visit my parents, so I'll be off social media for a little bit. And then when I get back, I'll catch you up with the new tarot-related storytelling projects, which I'm very much enjoying at the moment. So that's it for today. I'd really love to know if these are books that you've read. Have you read Gormenghast, the series? What do you think of it? I'd be really curious because I don't know many people who have actually read this book. My dad loves it, and he's the one who kind of passed it to me in the first place. But other than him, I haven't actually met anyone who's really read and enjoyed it. So I'd be really interested to know if you have. Let me know. Also, Shirley, if you've read that one, please let me know what you think about it, because I do think it was a bit of a month of weird books for me. I'd also love to know if you've picked up this one, the Nicole Rallis and Peter Henry Reid book. I haven't seen it around much on TarotTube, perhaps because it is a bit of a beginner's book. So maybe people don't feel the need for another beginner's book in tarot, which I completely understand. I like the artwork and I do enjoy the insights in this book, so I'm glad I added it to my collection. And I'd be very interested to know if anyone else has had any experience with it as well. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me for this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I very much hope that you're well wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye.